Welcome back to the channel. This is Professor Matt. We're going to be talking about the 12 cell salts, and I'm just going to dive right into it. What are they? Where they come from? How do we know about them, etc. So they originate with this man named Dr. Heinrich Wilhelm Schussler. I think that's, yeah, Wilhelm Heinrich Schussler. In the 1870s. He basically was experimenting with cadavers, and he discovered that there were essentially 12 minerals that were really essential for the human body. But of course, this is just plugged into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is like, yeah, well, you know, what's funny is those minerals do exist, and the human body does need all 12 of those minerals, but there's no or little to no evidence and blah blah blah. And the NIH, of course, like, come on, I'm not even going to get into it. You guys already know that they're not going to admit to it anyway, right? So if you were not aware, the 12 cell salts are actually not only very real. I have a calcium fluoride deficiency as a cancer. That is my cell salt. When I was a child, I craved milk like all the time. It was really weird. I drank a lot of dairy, and you know, you can drop the comments. There's always somebody in my comments, like every single day, every video that I put out. I'll say something like I drank a lot of dairy, and they'll put, you know, the dairy industry is evil, and you know, you should go vegan and blah blah blah. It's like, all right, go watch a couple of my videos on my channel. We're talking about grounded practicality here. I take a very pragmatic approach. I'm not going to be say here talking about the woo-woo stuff, all right? We're going to get into the real science of this and how this operates. So, do I believe in the 12 cell salts? Absolutely. I definitely believe that there is some form of an indication whether or not the scientific community wants to accept it or not. Of course they don't want to accept it, and the reason that they don't want to accept it is because they'll never accept homeopathy so long as the medical industrial industry continues its rampant mission to destroy the health of people all in the Western world. They do not like this form of medicine. The East does, however. I don't know what China and India are doing right now in terms of homeopathy, but I do know that it's a little bit more accepting than the West is. In any case, what you're going to see is there's no evidence, but we found no peer-reviewed scientific study supporting the idea because but wait, where is it? I know that it's somewhere in here. Adequate mineral intake during pregnancy is essential for maternal health, fetal growth, and development. I know I saw it. Basically, it's going to pop out and say, well, there was never really a study done. Okay, so you're talking about a branch of science which has existed for hundreds of years, all right, all across cultures. They used herbology, they used natural medicines. It's like the Western medicine complex loves to basically say, yeah, you know, everybody just died. Like, you know, if you got sick, you just died back in those days, and it was so barbaric. You know, there was definitely no way that we advanced as human beings over the course of the thousands of years of our existence. We would just get sick and die immediately. And yes, that is true. That did happen a lot. However, most of the biggest issues like the Black Plague or any of these other issues, you know, they'll tell, oh, the Black Plague started because of rats and blah blah blah. Most of it was because of their medicinal system. They didn't, you know, respect nature. They were trying all these convoluted schemes and methods, you know. But basically, I read through this whole thing earlier because I just love to type it in. I love to get the the general data, right, of what the common people, because like you're never going to get the straight answers with ChatGPT. That's why, you know, with AI, I don't always recommend using it. But you know, they'll say most evidence is anecdotal, blah blah blah. There was a quote. I really wish that I had saved it. That basically said there was not a single study that was done, even though this is a very popular methodology of practice for human beings, right? Like energy work is also not accepted at all. Oh, there's no science to it. Acupuncture, there's no science to it. That's what they want you to believe naturally. Now, in the Eastern world versus the Western world, this is the major caveat that you need to understand as far as the branching forms of medicine go. Well, first and foremost, I should say, none of this is medical advice. Don't take any of this as medical advice. I'm not that kind of doctor. But the main difference you have to understand is the West is very good with emergency practices. All right, if you break your bone, if you break your leg, they can patch you up real fast. Now, the East can do that too, but they've really been copying a lot of the Western fronts in that regard. And a lot of the reasons why the West knows that is because they were very keen on war, a lot more than the East was. However, the West is really good in emergency type situations in which it's life or death. 1/3 of the time, if it's life or death, they're going to kill you. Medical malpractice in the West is exceedingly high compared to pretty much anywhere else. Europe and America and Canada, and also too, our healthcare system is just abhorrent here in the United States. But that being said, what you're going to find the difference is basically the Eastern forms of medicine are more about maintaining a balance within the body and avoiding and removing the obstacles that would lead to emergency type situations. They're very good with long-term health. Where they struggled with in the last couple of hundreds of years, which is what most people go for in medical situations, is emergency situations. Which is why, ER was the #1 watch show through the 90s or whatever it was. It was a very popular show in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it was because there's a fascination with morbidity, especially in, Western culture. Now, with that being said, I feel like I'm going to sneeze, so if I do, I apologize. With that being said, what you're going to find if you start looking into the bare basics and the bare bones of this is, they're going to say, some of these hypotheses are correct and blah, blah, blah. No scientific evidence, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah, okay. Now, evidence and critique. Biochemical tissue salt therapy has been used for many years to treat many ailments. However, most evidence supporting its effectiveness is anecdotal. Okay, well, guess what? That's kind of like a lot of evidence, don't you think? So what I did was I went through the effort of saying, hey, why don't you give me the breakdown? We're talking about people who were over 100 years ago, and I'm going to give you guys like their pictures and stuff here soon. Actually, I might as well start doing that now. This is Dr. Wilhelm Heinrich Schussler. He was the initiator of discovering these 12 mineral-based salts, and I think he found it by burning cadavers, okay? And then his work eventually would evolve with Dr. George W. Carey and Dr. Inez Eudora Perry, who was a woman. Actually, she was a female doctor in the early 1900s, which is a really big deal. She's got some books that are completely off limits, which I would love to get my hands on, but they're in one of the Berkeley libraries, I think, in California, and they won't give it to me because I'm not a student. And they started the Carey Perry School of the Chemistry of Life, where they talk about inner alchemy, they talk about sacred secretion, they talk about the Christos process, they talk about all this stuff. And it's very fascinating. They have a lot of great detail. I highly recommend that you read like the Zodiac Cell Salts to Salvation and God, Man, Word Made Flesh. Those are some great books. When you're getting into the introduction of these informations, and then here is essentially the list, right? And it's not per your zodiacal sign yet. I can showcase that to you later, but. They came out with these wheels, in which case you're like, circular in nature. Now let me share with you where a lot of this information comes from. Science does show that the mineral deficiency or the nutritional deficiency of the mother equally impacts the child and will lead the child that's forming in the womb, here we go, fertilization all the way to the zygote. Now, the mineral deficiency of the mother during the time of her pregnancy will impact the child and will give the child mineral deficiencies. Science will prove that, but they're not going to go so far as to say that the cell salts are real. Why? Because it's all homeopathy. I remember I started working with one of my health practitioners. She's a homeopathy expert. And she was really astounded that I even knew about this. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if you know this, but you should look into the 12 cell salts of salvation because it's essentially the same thing. And it is. Homeopathic remedies operate off of things like your birthday and things like that. Why is that? I'm going to showcase that from an energy standpoint and also a physical standpoint in this video. And I'm going to do it in the next 15 minutes, so we'll make this a bit of a shorter one. What you'll notice is that the appearance of this mechanism, first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about embryogenesis and embryology right now. The sperm hits the egg. You begin to mitosate. I don't think that's actually a word. You undergo mitosis, which means that you start to split apart. So two things become one, and then one becomes two. It's an inverted effect. The beginning of life really is like a reversal stage because already the egg's formed, within the mother's womb. The sperm had formed from germ cells within the testicles. And so I'm just keeping it simple in that regard because I'm not trying to focus too heavily on these things. So, keeping it simple, you start to undergo mitosis. Two things become one, and then one becomes two. Two becomes four. Four becomes eight, etc., etc. And you start to split and split and split until you form this dual zone, so to speak, and you become what's called a blastocyst. The blastocyst essentially leaves its shell in order to implant itself into the mother. And it's, in fact, in the medical term, they call it an invasion, which is a little negative, but it kind of is. But anyway, the blastocyst will then remove its the zoa. Okay, so this is like the zoa, as in zodiac, as in a wheel, right? Because it's a zoo. It's a zoo. You're the zoo. You've got all these different parts, and essentially you break apart where your head and your feet would generally assumedly touch. It's like not exact, but that's actually where they get this imagery from, where the brain and the head are connected, and the nervous system connects the entire route, which is why there's nerves in the feet that connect to all parts of the body. Okay, that's just like a little tidbit for you. But essentially, this protective sac removes, the living being removes itself from its pleroma. Okay, so now we're getting into like that kind of Gnostic idea. Implants itself into the mother. Okay, so you're the demiurge, essentially. And then begins to hypercreate itself, splits itself into two separate entities, one of which is like the thing itself, one of which becomes the placenta, which the placenta is connected by the umbilical cord, the serpent wrapped around the tree, into heaven, and you'll see that even in like Hindu iconography. You'll see, who is it? I can't remember. Vishnu. Vishnu is sleeping on the bed of water, and he's got a link, a silver cord or a red cord, linked from his belly button, his navel, all the way up into the heavens. And it's very similar to that effect where it's like that's how we come in as gods with a lower G, so to speak. Okay, this is where a lot of mythological divine interpretations come from. Now, what does this have to do with the cell salts? I'm glad you asked. As you'll see, we start to form toroidally. So the energy mechanics of just energy in general, now that this is a living, breathing, well, not really breathing, but it's undulating as a form of breathing. This living entity begins to toroidally form via energetic mechanics. So already we see, here's my point, energy impacts the baby, okay? You wouldn't be able to form into this if you didn't undergo this, where like the toroidal energy starts to impact. And then this is, of course, again, where that like Zoa breaks. It's like the awaken. It's like each one of these is a stage of consciousness awakening. Okay. And you'll never, like, you can go cross-reference what I'm about to say here. Go try to find the stages between blastocyst and embryo. It's almost impossible. It's almost like they don't want you to see what that mechanism looks like, because they'll show you all of this where it breaks out of the shell and it goes into the mother and it invades the mother's womb, so to speak. But it's very difficult to find something like this where, here's like the 2, here's the 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Okay, so we go from a ball, we go from an orb, all right, to an elongated thing, which then starts to look like this like weird little fish monster. All right. It's all part of the evolutionary process, and this is what we've projected onto mythology and psychology and all that. Now, what does this have to do with the 12 cell salts? Because the theory goes basically like this. Because different energy frequencies are utilized by the sun and by the moon during different months, partially, and this is all hypothetical, but part of this energy concept stems from the idea, part of this cell salt concept stems from the idea that the energy mechanics of whatever frequency is at play affects our human bodies, especially the mother's body, to create specific cell salts. So depending on when you were in your mother's womb for those 9 or so months determines the 3 months that you don't get that energetic protection. theoretically speaking, a woman who could somehow house a child within her womb for 12 months for an entire year, which probably wouldn't be the best, but if we could do that, if we were on that pathway, then you would theoretically not have any cell salt deficiencies. That's like the guess, right? Now, that is actually further emphasized by the evidence that I'm going to propose today, which is this, which is essentially that based on when you were born, is determined by the foods that your mother was eating and your cell salt signature. Now, keep in mind what we do today, where you can walk into a grocery store and you can buy any food pretty much all year round. Shit, you can order food from the southern hemisphere, the northern hemisphere, whatever, however that operates. You can order food from around the world to basically eat whatever you want, right? And not to mention, we chock load our food full of crap anyway, especially in the Western world. So it's not kind of impossible to assume that seasonality of food impacted our evolution and impacted our mother's abilities to eat specific foods all throughout her pregnancy, which would have been seasonal related, causing these deficiencies. And as you'll see on the right hand side, the only one that it struggled with was cancer, which is actually my sign. But I think that it is. I think that it is looking at. It's first of all, it's calcium fluoride, and for whatever reason, it is looking for fluoride just by itself. So I think that's where it kind of struggled, because we don't really eat a lot of or consume a lot of fluoride itself in foods. It's more that's more like a mineral thing. But anyway, I can tell you as a cancer, I have a calcium deficiency. I've had a scientific hair test done like a year ago, and it came back and said you have a major calcium deficiency. So I was like, okay, so that means I've got to eat more foods, not take calcium supplements. It's not a good idea, but I need to eat more foods that align with my calcium deficiency. It's just part of the course. But it would make sense from an evolutionary standpoint over thousands of years of preconditioning, where our mothers were eating seasonal related foods that were not available, and the foods that were not available during the times that she was pregnant probably caused some form of evolutionary line. And as you'll notice, it says moderate, strong, moderate, strong, moderate, strong. And the correlation basically discovered that, yeah, it would make sense based off of these, ideas of what these cell salts have to do. Like for example, it didn't do the full thing, right? Because it doesn't want to. The AI doesn't want to admit it. But sodium for Aquarius, sodium chloride, and it's looking for just sodium, right? And it's like, yes, if you were born if you were born, as an Aquarius, then maybe maybe you didn't get your mother didn't get enough of a sodium chloride intake, right? That's just again an assumption. Salt preserved foods, historically common midwinter, which was around Aquarius time. So maybe she's eating those foods towards the end of the pregnancy, but towards the beginning of the pregnancy during the spring and the summertime, she wasn't able to eat as much salt, right? Because salt is mostly eaten in the wintertime, which would impact the very early beginning stages of the embryogenesis within the baby. It's kind of that kind of a assumption, that kind of a hypothesis. But anyway, I think that physically coincides with the ideas that we have surrounding these wonderful ideas around cell salts. Now, if you don't know your cell salt, you can pause and you can read, because there's a lot here. I would definitely look at this column here. Don't look at what it's saying here, because I think it's a little confused in certain regards. But if you're interested, my AI tool, which I just developed a couple months ago, I just went live with it, has a cell salt signature reading for you. It will tell you the types of foods that you should be eating. Not medical advice, of course, but this coincides and aligns with the inner alchemical process, the sacred secretion, the inner Christ, etc. So if that interests you, please go check it out. I highly recommend it, and it also helps me too. So I love you guys. We did have a little bit of like issues this past week because of the Amazon servers and whatnot going down. It kind of, that internet outage kind of impacted our servers here with the Astraya app. That's what it's called. But please go check that out. And additionally, you can also check out my online university, Psycosmos University. There's a lot of great information there too. But I won't do a lot of plugging today. I love you guys, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. I hope that this was a pretty cool, helpful breakdown of the beginning stages of life, the embryogenesis, the cell salts, and everything. If you have additional questions, comments, concerns, please drop comments down below. The cell salt stuff is pretty easy. You know, it's pretty straightforward. You just kind of Google what your cell salt is, depending on your birthday, and you kind of lean into those types of foods, especially if you're feeling like lethargic, tired, etc. You know, I try to have healthy amounts of dairy products or whatever for my calcium fluoride deficiency, and like broccoli and squash and other types of foods that are really good for me. So I definitely recommend that over taking supplements. I know that they have like the bioplasma and the other types of brands that are the 12 cell salts. I've used those. They're good to kind of get your body, you know, back acclimated, but really you want to take this stuff in from foods rather than supplementation. So I love you guys. I'll see you guys in the next video. Reach out if you need anything. I'm here for coaching. I'm here for my online university and my AI tool and my books and my courses and all that. So love you guys. See you soon. Take care.